today we're finishing up the chapter on open borders and the strain they put on the fabric of the nation. But before we get there, does anyone remember the whole Syrian refugee crisis narrative from 10 years ago? How some Americans were advocating for tens of thousands of them to come over to the United States, unvetted, of course, or how the refugees from the North Africa, Middle East region, MENA region, have been pouring into Europe for over a decade now, since the Arab Spring, bringing Sharia and no-go zones with them. And how it was all done out of compassion for these people. Let's welcome them in, and we don't need to vet them because they're just looking for a better life. They're just looking for safety from this tumultuous region. And does anyone remember the cries of racism and Islamophobia directed against anyone who dared to say, maybe we should be doing background checks on these people, or maybe we should only be allowing women and children in? I mean, if it's a civil war, why are fighting age men making up a large portion of these populations that are invading the West? Did you know that the president of Iran in 2011, said that they would take the United States too, that they would be able to take over the United States too, and they would use Mexico to do it? I mean, this is what we've been dealing with for over 10 years now. And then on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas was live streaming their own atrocities on social media, this is not what was put in the mainstream media, this is social media live streaming of Hamas atrocities. We're watching this, and my husband said, those look a lot like the young men streaming across our border. He was talking to the border to the south, where they were talking about like 8,000 refugees or asylum seekers or migrants were coming across the border every day at that time. I mean, we went from looking for lone wolf terrorists and shutting down jihadi camps to inviting tens of thousands of potential jihadis through our open border. It would only take about 1,500 jihadis strategically located across the United States, acting in concert, to completely destabilize this country. And how will they get to all these places? Well, remember the previous brilliant political stunt of sending illegals to sanctuary cities that I talked about? Well, maybe that might be one way they could get spread all the way across the country. And this is another example of what I mean when I say it does not need to be a conspiracy for the danger to be real. It can be everyone working in their own interests. DeSantis and Abbott sending illegals across the country, not sending them to become terrorists in these blue cities. I think they're doing it to make a point that we need to secure the border and maybe start deporting. But it is still possible they are aiding, albeit perhaps unknowingly, but maybe not. But they're aiding in the distribution of jihadis and the jihadi ideology into the cities and regions controlled by the people who wanted to invite such refugees into our country. But we have to also remember that it was promised by the president of Iran that among these refugees would be, not might be, would be jihadi soldiers. So we have blue and red governors or politicians working against each other, but they have both sides have contributed to a potential and imminent danger. Those who admittedly seek to destroy our country, terrorists, for example, desire easy access to this country. If we invite the enemy in and never seek to discover who the enemy is, it makes the enemy's job so much easier. Avowed enemies of this country are allies of those who desire the destruction of it. So, when it appears that someone is not worried about who might take advantage of the porous border or the de facto open border policy, why would they not be celebrating the entry of the enemy? Those who advocate for open borders are allies of the enemies of this nation, making them enemies of the nation. And when these enemies are government officials whose one job is to protect their constituents and the American people, and who have sworn to protect American rights and liberties through allegiance to the U.S. Constitution, and who have sworn to protect Americans and the American homeland from enemies without and within, it seems easy to see why some might believe they are instead seeking to destroy the country from within. And their true allegiances are not to the American people, not to the American nation, not to the great American experiment, but to something entirely else. And who are those true allegiances to? I think this is where I could go completely off the rails and talk about other people's theories, and perhaps there are listeners out there who have theories of their own, some of which probably have been ridiculed in the media at this point. But I actually have my own theories that would probably look even kookier. So suffice it to say, whatever those true allegiances are, they probably have everything to do with power and something to do with money and nothing to do with the security, liberty, and rights of the American people. Open borders is definitely one of the most important and impactful loose threads being pulled, but not necessarily for the reasons other pundits have laid out. It is not simply about language, crime, or even economics, not even about sovereign borders. Obviously, all of those play a role in undermining the two pillars. Borders are necessary to delineate where a nation begins and ends, and where the people of the nation can find refuge in their laws and principles. Crime and economics are intricately entwined in the pillar of shared values. And the pillar of shared language is a foundational requisite to supporting a civilization. And yes, the elections angle might also play a role, but our quote-unquote leaders often fail to understand human nature and the consequences of their policy choices and plans. Human beings do not always act in ways the elites believe they will or should. In fact, even some very wealthy and powerful people have upset the apple cart, I believe, on purpose, and most recently, like, of course, Donald Trump, but also Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And even after the elites, those people in charge, are quote-unquote leaders, even after they observe the unexpected results, they still believe they can control outcomes, like in elections. But this is such a wild card take, in my opinion, that I find it amazing that this is the theory the quote-unquote right has latched onto and held tightly to. Again, I'm not saying it isn't plausible or it isn't part of the equation, but elections and illegals becoming voters, this is not the primary avenue for open borders to undermine the American fabric or way of life. Open border policy chips away at both pillars in multiple ways. Let me know in the comments what bothers you most about de facto open border policy, what you see as the aspect most destructive to our foundational fabric, and why. Or if you totally disagree with everything I'm saying in this chapter, let me know how and why in the comments. I really do like to know what other people are thinking. Remember, we are talking about the pillars that hold a society or civilization up, that of shared values and shared language. And shared values are much more complex in the case of the United States than in civilizations past, because of the ultimate secularization due to the foundational looms that weaved the fabric of our country from the original threads. We'll get to this much later in the book, but the shared values aspect of civilization everywhere else, it can be referred to as shared religion. So the two pillars pretty much everywhere else are shared language and shared religion, but not in the United States. Our values are uniquely positioned on principles and natural law in ways not seen quite anywhere else, even though the United States does always tend to get lumped in with the West. Likewise, and related as we shall see, the pillar of shared language does not begin and end with discarding the idea of an official language or putting everything, automated answering services, retail signs, etc., into multiple languages. So join us next time as we discuss why and how words matter.